Hello, welcome back to my channel. For those of you who are new around here, my name is Vanessa. Welcome. I am a watercolor artist and an artisanal handmade watercolor paint maker. That is so hard for me to say. I'm just like, maybe I should just not say that. I make paint. All right, I'm going to say that from now on. Hi, my name is Vanessa. I'm an artist and I make paint. So last week, I asked over on Instagram, was it last week or maybe the week before? Time is blurring all together. So the point is, over on Instagram, I asked you to submit your questions and I was going to do a small Q&A. I get tons of questions every day over on Instagram about like different aspects of what I do, how I do the process of my work. So I thought that I'd put it all in a video and put it out to you. That way I can answer a lot more than one. And my poor little fat fingers won't have to be, texting and typing in all the time. So let's get started. So the first question is, what led you to discover watercolors and what have you learned about yourself along the way as a painter and a maker? Okay, so I started watercoloring in 2017 as a form of self-care. I was a social worker for 16 years. And, for my fellow social workers or those who work in human services, you know just how draining that could be. And you really do need to find ways to take care of yourself. So I've always been a huge proponent of self-care. And I would always encourage my staff to partake in self-care so that they wouldn't get burnt out and they would have kind of the capacity to do the job and to do the job well. But I found myself, even with all the other forms of self-care that I was doing, I found myself still kind of reaching that point where I just didn't know how to handle all of the stress that came with the job. So I needed to find a way to put all of that energy into kind of a creative outlet and kind of get that out of me. So I have an older daughter who is in college, and she called me one day and said, "Hey mom, I discovered this great new thing to keep me organized." So she was telling me a little bit about it, and it was bullet journaling. I had never heard of bullet journaling before, but I was like, this sounds really interesting. And it's also a great way to kind of keep me organized. So I started bullet journaling as well. And her and I would compare our layouts and, we had fun with this together. So I got on Instagram and I started following a bunch of accounts who do bullet journaling. And I made a lot of great friends from that account. And one day I saw this one account. I can't remember who it was, but she did some watercolor pieces in her bullet journal. And I was like, oh wow, this looks really interesting. Like, this looks great. So I went out and I bought a really cheap set of like Crayola watercolors with a really cheap 50-cent brush. And I started watercoloring in my journal and I fell in love with it. One thing led to another and I eventually put bullet journaling to the side. I kind of gave up on that and I took up watercolors instead. And I just found that I kind of had a knack for it and I loved it. So I would go to work 9 to 5, come home, take care of the kids, take care of the family. And after I put my youngest, who was 2 years old at the time, after I put her to bed at night around 7:30, 8 o'clock, I would take out my supplies and I would be painting all through the night. And one of the things that I really wanted to do was to get better at it. So I challenged myself to paint every single day until I saw some noticeable improvements. Now, I didn't give myself a time frame. I didn't say I'm going to paint every day for 3 months or every day for 5 months. I just wanted to paint every day. So that little challenge turned into me painting every day for about 6 to 7 months straight. And I didn't spend every single day, I didn't spend hours and hours painting. I painted, 15 minutes one day if that's all I could take, half an hour another day. Some days I painted 2 and 3 hours. I took a lot of courses on Skillshare, on YouTube. I did a lot and saw this huge improvement in my work. And honestly, it's been all uphill ever since then. I have completely fallen in love with the art of watercolor. And in fact, I found a way to eventually leave my job of 16 years and make this a full-time career. What's the easiest project to start with? I can only tell you from my experience what the easiest was for me. And that was with galaxies, which I still have a profound love for today. Starting off with painting galaxies taught me so much in terms of color mixing, blending, what papers to use, what works best with what. Painting galaxies was my foundation. That's where I started, and everything kind of just grew from there. I never really completely stuck to galaxies. I explored tons and tons of different mediums. And if you look on my Instagram feed and you scroll all the way down, you'll see that I have never ever just pigeonholed myself into one type of painting. I go through phases. I like painting moons, and I go through my celestial phases, and I go through my floral phases, and I even went through a little lettering phase where I taught myself some lettering, obviously with some very needed tools, because that's not something that I kind of picked up on right away. But I explored a ton of different mediums, but galaxy was definitely my start. What or who inspires you? This one has always been very hard for me to answer. Obviously, my number one inspiration is my family. My well-being was the reason, my mental and physical well-being was one of the reasons why I started watercoloring, because I found that I was a grouch. I was grumpy all the time when I was super stressed out at my job. I was reaching the point of burnout, and I was a mess. So I really started this journey, not only for myself, but for my family, so that they could really have the best of me and not this person that I became because I was just so overwhelmed and stressed all the time. My family was really the one who inspired me to kind of get on this journey. And I find my inspiration in them every single day. I also find inspiration just in the world around me. And it sounds so cliche, but it's kind of true. If you look at what I paint, I usually paint things from the world around me. I paint landscapes, and I paint galaxies and space and celestial paintings. So I really do get inspired by that. Those of you who don't know, I have a Pinterest account. It's called The Sprout Creative, and I put a lot of my inspirational work in there, things that inspire me, pictures and videos and photographs. All of that is on Pinterest. And when I need a little bit of extra inspiration, when I'm kind of stuck and I don't know what to do, I always go to Pinterest to kind of give me some ideas about where to take my art next. How do you sell your art? That one is tough. There was one point where I was selling my art on my small business website, The Sprout Creative, and something kind of felt off to me about that. I didn't really want to kind of like mix my personal art with that part of my business. So I took that down. And now, usually people just approach me after I post something on Instagram. So I'd say like 50 to 60% of the work that I post on Instagram gets sold. People will just DM me and say, hey, can I buy that piece off of you? I really love it. Can you make that piece? I don't do commissions because my brain doesn't work that way. I can't paint a piece on demand. It just never works out. I paint what inspires me, and if someone is inspired by that piece, and if somebody wants to purchase that piece, they'll just DM me and I will sell it that way. So the majority of my sales of my artwork come from Instagram. How do you cope with self-doubt? I have a lot of it. I still consider myself pretty much a beginner. I've been doing this for about 3 years, 3 years, yeah. But I still feel like I am still learning, and I am still, I still want to keep improving my skills, and I really want to start branching out and doing more than what I'm doing now. And I think I'm always going to be like that. I am a lifelong learner. I love learning about everything, not just about art, but I just have a love for learning. So when I feel that self-doubt start creeping in, what I usually do is I will take a class. I will go on Skillshare. I will go on YouTube. I will do some practices, because usually for me, self-doubt signifies that I'm feeling stuck. And I'm feeling stuck in what I'm doing, and I'm feeling stuck in my processes, and I'm feeling stuck in my art and what I'm putting out. That's usually how self-doubt manifests itself within me. And it may be a little bit different for other folks, but usually when I start getting that little inkling of, oh, this isn't good enough, or I'm not good enough, or, you know, this is just not working out, what am I doing? It means that I need to try something new. For me, it kind of usually means that I'm on the brink of breaking through and kind of learning something else. So that's when I turn to other avenues, such as Skillshare, YouTube. I start following new artists on Instagram at that point to give me a little bit more inspiration and kind of help me take my painting to the next level. What is your process for choosing your palette for your piece? It really starts, for me, it starts with what I want to paint. Now, I don't always go into a painting knowing exactly what I want to paint. And I talked about this in one of my previous videos, and I will link it up here. But I don't always go into a painting knowing exactly what I want to paint. Sometimes I'll have an idea and I'll go into it, and that idea will turn into something completely new. But I usually do have a color scheme in mind. And if once again, if you look through my Instagram feed, you'll see that everything kind of has the same color scheme of blues and purples. So once I kind of have an idea about what I want to paint, I will take out my Galaxy palette, and that's this palette here. So this is just a specially curated palette of colors that I have, and I talk about this in one of my other videos that I will link up top. These are all brands, all colors. So it kind of does take a lot of the guesswork out of me stressing over what colors I need to use, what palette I need to use. I use a lot of these. I also use my own personal handmade watercolors, but usually the colors that I use fall within this spectrum. I feel I get the most inspiration from these colors. So I always have this ready-made. I always have 3 palettes that I have next to me in my area at all times. It's this one. I'm going to count these as one. So these are my handmade watercolors. And as you can see, the ones that have the most dent in them are the blues and the purples. The blues, the purples. Some I like to mix in, you know, the blues and the pinks to make purples. So these are my handmade watercolors, and I consider this one set. I like to add touches, finishing touches with my shimmers, and I wanted to try my hands at using some colors that I have never used before. So you'll see a lot of pastels. You'll even see some greens here, but I picked these greens because this one has more of a yellow tone to it, this one has more of a blue tone to it. They're non-granulating, so I figured that if I wanted to try my hand at a little bit of a green, it had to be a color that was closer to colors that I felt comfortable using. So I use this palette a lot. It has a lot of pastels, and I've been experimenting with this palette in my journal. So, you know, I always have these 3 on hand. So when I'm thinking of a piece that I want to paint, I don't really need to kind of search for or put too much thought into what colors I want to use, because I can just use these. I love your work. You seem to create a lot of pieces. What do you do with them? Like I said earlier, I do sell some of my pieces on Instagram. Unless I'm really attached to a piece, then sometimes I'll have to say no if I'm super, super attached to a piece. But for the pieces that don't sell, I have them in little plastic box. I have 3 of these, and they're all filled with my pieces. I do get asked to donate pieces to charity, to raffles. So I always do. I don't think I've ever turned anyone down. And I pull those pieces from my box. So these are just filled with a lot of the pieces that I have done. And you know, I just have laying around. I just kind of keep them. I have framed some of them. Some of them are around my house. I've given some to friends and family. But yeah, so for the most part, I keep my pieces that don't sell or that I don't give away to charities or auctions or raffles or things like that. Do you paint with watercolor pencils? And the answer is yes, I do. However, I don't post that on Instagram. Occasionally, I'll post them in my stories if it's a piece that, you know, I want to share, or if it has a little bit of inspiration for someone. I have a motivational journal that I keep, and this is full of pieces that I use watercolor pencils with. So here are some examples. So I use some shimmers. This one has my shimmers on it, and pencils, and I like to put little motivational sayings on it. And, you know, this is just something that kind of helps me when I'm feeling blue or when I'm feeling down. And I do have my moments. I'm not always super cheery. But I like to look through this book. I also like to create in this book when I'm feeling, you know, really uninspired. And being able to do something different than what I normally do, such as painting these girls, these women. I love painting these women. And I always put a quote next to them. And yeah, this is just, it's something that I do for me, which is why I don't usually put this up on Instagram. It's something that I do for me, and this is really near and dear to my heart. So yeah, so that's what I use my watercolor pencils for. If you want me to do a video on motivational journals and watercolor pencils, then leave a comment down below and I would love to do that for you. How do you decide whether to paint on a block of paper or just regular paper? I personally prefer to paint on blocks of paper. And the reason I prefer to do that is because I don't have to tape down my paper. The majority of the time that I watercolor, I use a lot of water. So if I don't use a block of paper, then I have to tape down my paper. It doesn't always really work out. Sometimes, depending on the tape that I use, the tape will lift up or I'll get paint underneath it, and it's a hassle. It's a hassle for me. So I try not to use loose sheets of paper unless I'm doing something that doesn't require a lot of water. The majority of the time, I'm using a block of paper. I will also choose a loose paper over a block of paper if I'm doing a small painting or a small tutorial. That way, I don't have to waste a huge, big paper, because usually my blocks of paper are like 9 by 12 or higher. And I won't have to waste a huge piece of paper on something that I could accomplish with a smaller piece of paper. But for me, the majority of the time, I'm using a block of paper. It's what I love to use. Okay, so here are 2 questions that are kind of related. The handmade color making process is so intimidating that I so want to try it myself. So I asked, how hard a handmade watercolor making can be and what skill is required to do the same? When I first started making my own watercolor paints, I knew nothing about it, nothing. So what I did before I actually started making it, you know, by hand, is that I did a lot of research. I did a couple of months of research. I read books. I looked for information on the internet. I practiced. I started off by buying a pre-made binder because I didn't know how to make my own binder. So I did a few trial and errors with that. And then I was like, this makes no sense. Let me make my own binder. So that was another couple of months of trying to perfect my binder recipe. And to this day, I'm still toying around with my binder recipe. So it does take a certain amount of skill, but it's a learned skill. It's a skill that anybody can learn with a little bit of research, a little bit of education, and a lot of practice and a lot of dedication. A lot of these questions were repetitive. So I have 2 more questions that I'm gonna hit on, and hopefully this answered everybody else's question. One question is, how long did it take you to paint like you did, and did you take a lot of courses? And the answer is yes. So it took me a while to learn how to paint, but it's kind of a tricky question because I feel like I'm still kind of learning, you know, along the way. I don't consider myself an expert. I consider myself a learner. I still see myself in some ways as a beginner because I am constantly learning. So my first question, I kind of answered this. It took me about 6 to 8 months for me to feel really comfortable actually watercoloring and feel comfortable in my ability to do so. And I started my Instagram account at the very, very beginning of my journey. So you can take a look and scroll all the way to the bottom and you'll see the evolution of my painting. So in my eyes, it took me a while to get better. I'm still not, you know, phenomenal, the number one, you know, that I will never be. But I am constantly learning and I am constantly applying what I learn and practicing. And really, that's the only way that you're going to grow, is to keep learning and to keep practicing and keep doing what you love. As far as the courses, I did take courses. I took courses on Skillshare and I took some free tutorials on YouTube. I also followed along with a lot of the speed paints that folks put up on Instagram and I found a lot of inspiration on Pinterest as well. So yes, I took a lot of courses. I always consider that as part of my learning. I highly recommend you do the same. I also teach on Skillshare. I don't think I've ever mentioned that here before, but I do teach on Skillshare, and I teach a lot of the techniques that I kind of learned and I kind of taught myself along the way. So I'll put a link down below to some of my courses on Skillshare. And if you like some of like the celestial pieces and the moon pieces, the moon paintings, and the landscape paintings, I will link those down below for you. All right, and the last question has to do with my business. So, do you have any business related tips on tracking expenses and taxes? I have 1 full year under my belt as a small business owner, as a full-time small business owner, and I am learning from the ground up, and I am not that great at it. I actually had to call a friend of mine to come in and kind of help me navigate. My friend is an accountant, and to help me navigate this, because it is daunting and it is something that's foreign to me. Like, I do my taxes every year, but having a small business is completely different than just doing your regular taxes if you're working for someone else. So some things that I learned from my 1 year of hits and misses, right, is number one, yes, keep track of all of your expenses and all of your earnings. So I've learned, and people, I know that some folks do this on a weekly basis. I just don't have the mind power to devote a day to this every single week. So at the end of the month, I look at all of my income earnings and all of my expenses, and I update them on a spreadsheet. And it's easier for me to keep track of things that way, especially since now I have to file taxes quarterly instead of annually, which is something that I wasn't aware of, and that kind of like came back to bite me in the end. But I know that going forward. So keep a detailed, and it could be something as super, super simple as having an Excel spreadsheet to this month I spent this, and this month I earned this, and just break it down that way. There's a bunch of things that I learned. So for you small business owners out there, or some of you who are just starting off as small business and you want to know more about that, let me know. Maybe I'll put a poll up there for some of the things that I talked about. So let me know if you want to learn more about that, and I will absolutely share what I have learned over my first full year as a small business owner in terms of running a business and filing taxes and things like that. I will try my best. So that is it for my very first Q&A. I really enjoyed this. I really enjoyed answering your questions. So maybe I'll do it again in a couple of months. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to my channel. That would be great. I put out new content every Saturday. I do take a lot of what you want into account. So if you want more tutorials, more Q&As, more this, more that, leave me a comment down below. Send me a DM over on Instagram. Follow me over there. I put lots of polls and lots of fun stuff and speed paints and tutorials and things like that. And I will see you all next week. Thank you. Here, welcome. And just so, I don't just use it. Every single video, something falls. Here's some more videos for you.